You've done it again. You're standing directly in front of someone you've met at least 3 times, maybe 4, and their name is just gone. Not even hovering at the tip of your tongue, just completely, cleanly absent, like it was never filed anywhere in the first place. And the worst part isn't even the forgetting. It's the next 12 seconds of pure improvised theater you're about to perform, subtly angling your body, desperately hoping someone else in the room says their name first, or that their phone rings, or that the building catches fire. We've all been there, sure, but the people who do this most frequently, who chronically, consistently forget names, are not careless or rude, and they are almost certainly not as unintelligent as they've been silently led to believe. There is actually something very specific happening in their brains right at that moment, and once you understand it, you will never feel guilty about it the same way again. So, let's start with what actually happens the second you meet someone new. Your brain is instantly doing an enormous amount of work, all at the exact same time. It is reading their face. It is registering their tone of voice. It is figuring out the social context, calculating exactly where you stand, and trying to decide whether this person actually likes you, or whether you even like them, all while desperately trying to plan what you are supposed to say next. Your working memory, that short-term holding space in your prefrontal cortex, is essentially juggling 6 heavy objects at once. And right into that exact moment of absolute cognitive chaos, someone hands you a single, arbitrary sound, their name. Hi, I am Kevin. Kevin. Okay. The problem is, Kevin does not mean anything. It does not connect to a single thing you already know. It does not trigger a concept, an image, a feeling, or a memory. It just sits there, completely isolated in a brain that is, quite frankly, way too busy to babysit it. Psychologists actually have a name for why this happens. In 1987, researchers published a fascinating study demonstrating what is now called the Baker-Baker paradox. They showed participants a photograph of a man. They told one group that the man in the photo was a baker by profession. They told a separate group that the exact same person's last name was Baker. Days later, the researchers tested their memories. The people who learned the occupation remembered it far more easily than the people who learned it as a name. Think about that. It is the exact same word, but it yields a completely different level of retention. The reason comes down to how human memory actually works. The word baker, as a job, instantly activates a massive web of mental associations. Your brain automatically pictures white flour. It imagines the smell of fresh bread. It feels the warmth of early mornings in a bakery. But Baker, as a last name, activates absolutely nothing. It just floats there in the dark, rootless and disconnected. Names, by their very nature, are semantically empty. They are just arbitrary tags. Your brain is an incredibly efficient, highly evolved machine. It preferentially holds on to things that actually mean something, things that build a rich picture of the world around you. It simply refuses to waste its precious cognitive energy acting as a babysitter for a random piece of meaningless data. Now, this is where it might get a little uncomfortable, because it is more personal than most people want to admit. A significant portion of chronic name forgetters are simply people who are extremely in their own heads during social interactions, and they do this in an anxious way rather than an arrogant one. While the other person is introducing themselves, you are busy internally narrating. Am I making enough eye contact? Is this handshake too firm? Did I just interrupt them? The name enters briefly, and then your internal monologue bulldozes straight over it. This is actually documented. There is a phenomenon called the next-in-line effect, first documented in 1973 by psychologist Malcolm Brenner. He noticed that people waiting to speak in a group showed dramatically reduced memory for what the person directly before them just said. Why? Because in their head, they had already moved on. They were already preparing the next thing to say. They were editing themselves in real time. People who live with social anxiety, or even just a hyperactive self-awareness, are essentially stuck in that mode permanently, never quite here, always half a step into what comes next, which means the exact moment a name is actually offered to them, they are already somewhere else. If that is you, here is the ultimate reframe. You do not have a memory problem. You have a preoccupation problem. And those are two very different things. But there is something else that needs to be said. We need to talk about the people on the other end of this, the people whose names get forgotten, because the emotional sting of it is genuinely real, and it would be unjust to pretend otherwise. Having your name forgotten, especially repeatedly, lands like a small but pointed message. It feels like the other person is silently saying, "You did not matter enough to stick." Even if that is completely wrong, that is exactly what the brain hears. But here is the truth. The person who forgot your name probably thought about the conversation you had long after it was over. They remember what you said about your family. They remember the specific way you laughed at a joke. They were there. They were entirely present. They were just not quite there for the name part. And this brings us to a fundamental misunderstanding about how human memory actually works. It is not a recording. Your brain does not store experiences the way a computer hard drive stores files. It stores impressions, emotions, patterns, fragments, and it prioritizes ruthlessly. High emotion? Stored. Surprising? Stored. Think about the last funeral you attended. You probably remember the smell of the flowers. You remember the specific, heavy silence in the room. You remember a beautiful sentence someone said that resonated deep in your chest. But you do not remember the exact words printed on the order of service, because your brain made an executive decision about what actually mattered, and it was not the dry, mechanical text. Names are the printed order of service. Everything else about a person is the funeral. Your brain simply threw away the text to keep the feeling. But here is the ultimate plot twist. People who forget names easily often share a very specific cognitive superpower. They are what psychologists call highly associative thinkers. Their memory is not broken, it is just richly contextual. If you ask them what someone was wearing at a random dinner party 3 years ago, they might actually be able to tell you in vivid detail. They remember stories, they remember feelings, they remember the exact look on someone's face when they shared something vulnerable. But ask them the name of the person standing right next to them, total blank. Why? Because their brain was too busy cataloging absolutely everything else about the human being in front of them, except for the label. This is not a flaw in the mind. It is just a very particular neurological architecture. It is a brain built for empathy. It is an architecture that is frankly much better suited to storytelling, to deep emotional attunement, and to the kind of profound listening that makes people feel genuinely understood. It just happens to be remarkably ill-suited to the specific mechanical task of holding on to an arbitrary label under the pressure of social interaction. None of this means you should not try to get better at it, of course. You can actually hack this process. Repeating someone's name back to them the exact second you meet them, or deliberately connecting their name to a vivid visual image in your head. These tricks work, and they work because you are manually doing what your brain absolutely refuses to do automatically. You are forcing it to build a bridge. But that shame spiral, that quiet, lingering belief that forgetting names makes you a dismissive, uncaring person who moves through the world without really seeing people, that part is wrong. It has always been wrong. You are not absent. You are just someone whose mind prioritizes differently. Sometimes you just fail at the single least interesting thing about a person. That random, arbitrary sound their parents assigned to them before they had done a single thing worth remembering. The name was always the least of it. What you remember about people, the real stuff, the actual texture of who they are, that is still there.